Right, so for a country best known internationally for its alpine vistas, its dragon folklore, its quiet diplomacy, Slovenia has just done something that no other European state has dared to do. It stood up, named the crime, and shut the gate on the perpetrator. In a world where arms embargoes are often wielded as rhetorical fig leaves, Ljubljana's decision to impose a full spectrum ban on weapons transfers, imports, and transits to and from Israel lands like a diplomatic thunderclap. It's not the size of Slovenia's weapons trade that matters. It's not very big after all, but it's the size of the message that counts. The first country in the EU to take this step may not be the biggest player in the world, but they have just become the loudest voice in Europe's moral void. And while Israel may mock the embargo as inconsequential, the panic in Tel Aviv spin machine suggests otherwise. Because Slovenia didn't just break rank, it raised the bar for everybody else. Right, so the Slovenian government has just enacted a full arms embargo on Israel, becoming the first European Union member state to do so. The embargo is sweeping in scope, banning not only the export and import of military goods, but also the transit of weapons to and from Israel through Slovenian territory. This decision, announced by Foreign Minister Tanja Fajon, was justified explicitly on the basis of mounting evidence of international humanitarian law violations committed by Israel during its ongoing genocide of Gaza. In doing so, Slovenia has placed itself in direct moral opposition to the European mainstream, the EU, and opened a breach in the wall of passive complicity that has long surrounded Israel's impunity. While critics have sought to dismiss Slovenia's embargo as largely symbolic due to its limited trade volume with Israel, that reading misunderstands both the significance and the implications of the move. Slovenia's embargo marks a shift in the tectonics of European policy towards Israel. It draws its legal authority from both international law and the European Union's own arms export rules. It carries logistical and political consequences that extend beyond its borders. It exposes the hollowness of EU consensus on human rights and civilian protections. And perhaps most importantly, it sets a precedent as well, one that other nations may now be compelled to morally or legally follow. Certainly the pressure is going to be on them to do that. So to understand the significance of what Slovenia have done here, it's important to examine the broader arc of its foreign policy over the past year. Because back in June of last year, Slovenia was one of those nations that formally recognised the state of Palestine, joining Spain, Ireland and Norway in a coordinated diplomatic initiative. The move was ratified by a unanimous vote of 52-0 in the National Assembly. Prime Minister Robert Golob described the decision as a message of peace and a rejection of silence in the face of violence. While other EU states hesitated or offered symbolic gestures, Slovenia aligned itself with a growing bloc of countries in the global south and western periphery that were beginning to treat the occupation and destruction of Palestinian life as a legal and moral emergency. Yet recognition alone is not a policy, is it? It is a starting point, though. In the months that have followed, therefore, the humanitarian situation in Gaza deteriorated dramatically, as we know. The World Health Organization, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and Médecins Sans Frontières and numerous other independent observers have documented a campaign of starvation, of indiscriminate bombing and obstruction of aid that has killed tens of thousands and displaced a population of 2 million people. The International Court of Justice, in response to the infamous genocide case brought by South Africa, issued provisional measures in January of last year, of course, ordering Israel to refrain from genocidal acts and allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza unimpeded, something we know they haven't done. Bringing matters up to the here and now, the International Criminal Court has, of course, issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes and crimes against humanity. These charges, covering intentional starvation and collective punishment and targeted attacks on civilians, more of which we've seen in recent months, especially since the beginning of the supposed aid distribution at the lethal GHF aid hubs. This has all been substantiated by a growing body of evidence collected by international bodies and human rights organisations. Under such circumstances, arms exports or logistical support for Israel or Israeli military operations would place any EU member states at risk of violating their own obligations under international law. Therefore, Slovenia's arms embargo is not simply a protest, it's simply the operationalisation of their legal obligations and puts pressure on every other state to now follow suit, or they'll have to justify why not. The EU Council Common Position prohibits the export of military technology and equipment where there is a clear risk that such exports might be used for internal repression or serious violations of international humanitarian law. Slovenia's embargo is a direct and necessary application of this principle. It closes the gap between rhetorical support for human rights and actual compliance with the legal commitments. It demonstrates that law is not merely declarative, it is enforceable. It's supposed to be enforced, even if only by the principled few, it seems. Moreover, the embargo goes further than most national actions do by including a ban on transit. And this is where Israel is hurt the most by this move. This provision is not trivial at all. Slovenia occupies a geographically strategic position right smack bang in the middle of Central Europe. It's a NATO member, it's a participant in the Pan-European Transport Corridor 5, and a key conduit for road, rail, and maritime shipping between Western Europe and the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Its port of Koper is a logistical node through which military and dual-use goods often pass. By banning arms transit to and from Israel, Slovenia has created a bottleneck in the infrastructure of European complicity, right smack bang in the middle of Europe. Even if its own trade volumes with Israel are negligible, as Israel have made much of, it has disrupted the flow of material that may have passed through its territory from other EU or NATO states. This move has direct consequences for logistical chains that support joint NATO-Israel exercises and military coordination, as well as for EU-based arms manufacturers who may rely on cross-border shipping routes. It also raises difficult questions about the complicity of companies and governments that may now need to reroute sensitive shipments through other jurisdictions, potentially increasing legal risk or indeed media scrutiny. We can live in hope of that at least, can't we? But this aspect of the embargo may have the most far-reaching consequences, of course. It exposes and challenges the quiet channels of arms transit that have long enabled Western states to maintain plausible deniability. It forces companies and governments and customs authorities to confront whether their logistical systems are indirectly abetting war crimes. It creates a legal and diplomatic precedent that can be invoked in other jurisdictions. If Ireland or Belgium or Spain were to implement similar transit bans, large segments of Europe's military supply web would be effectively sealed off from Israeli access. Such a scenario would not only hinder Israel's ability to sustain long-term military operations using European logistics, but would also pressure multinational arms producers to reassess the legality and political sustainability of their supply chains. Israel's response to Slovenia's embargo has been predictably dismissive and contemptuous, as I've already inferred. An unnamed Israeli official told Ynet, and was quoted in the Times of Israel as well, that the move was meaningless. We don't buy so much as a pin from them, they said. Such rhetoric, however, does not refute the legal or political weight of the embargo. Rather, it reflects Israel's standard response to accountability, being mockery and deflection and the assertion of victimhood. It's a mode of diplomacy that seeks to delegitimize critique without engaging its substance. More broadly, Israel's dismissiveness is part of a long-standing strategy of narrative control. When South Africa filed its genocide case at the ICJ, Israeli spokespeople and allies in Western media attacked the court's credibility rather than engaging with the evidence. When the ICC issued arrest warrants, Israeli officials launched a global campaign to discredit the prosecutor and pressure friendly governments into denouncing the court. Those attacks on Karim Khan still very much ongoing as it happens. These tactics reflect a pattern of behaviour designed to erode the authority of legal institutions, whilst portraying Israel as uniquely targeted or misunderstood. This pattern of deflection has been observed repeatedly. Israel has attacked the credibility of the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, accused the ICJ of anti-Semitic bias and attempted to pressure EU states into silence through diplomatic threats and media campaigns. Slovenia's embargo resists that pressure. It refuses to be intimidated into complicity here. It aligns itself with the position that the rule of law cannot be selectively applied and that no state, however powerful, is exempt from legal scrutiny. The embargo also places Slovenia in stark contrast with the rest of the European Union now. Despite overwhelming evidence of violations of international law, the EU has failed to enact any form of collective sanction against Israel. It has refused to suspend the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which conditions preferential trade on respect for human rights. It has not halted arms exports from member states, and it has failed to provide meaningful support to international legal mechanisms such as the ICC and ICJ. Slovenia's unilateral action thus exposes the moral incoherence and political cowardice of EU foreign policy. It poses a question that Brussels can't answer. If Slovenia can act, why can't the rest of Europe then? Within the EU, divisions have deepened between member states calling for concrete action and those clinging to neutrality. Ireland, Belgium and Spain have called for greater scrutiny of arms exports. Meanwhile, Germany and France have remained largely cautious, prioritising strategic alliances and economic interests. And we can throw the UK into that mix as well, can't we? Slovenia's action brings these contradictions into sharper relief and may force a reckoning within EU institutions about the credibility of their stated human rights commitments. The answer, of course, lies in the geopolitics of power, alliance and inertia. Many EU member states are deeply enmeshed in military and intelligence cooperation with Israel. Others fear the political consequences of challenging pro-Israel lobbies or diverging from US foreign policy. But these justifications do not withstand legal or moral scrutiny. They are excuses for impunity. And Slovenia's embargo turns those excuses into embarrassments now. It also sets a benchmark for what genuine solidarity with Palestine can look like. Not just rhetorical support, but material withdrawal. Not just statements, but sanctions. Not just recognition of a Palestinian state, but divestment from the machinery that enables its destruction as well. In this, Slovenia is aligned with a growing international trend. Latin American countries such as Colombia and Bolivia have severed military ties with Israel, set to go further as part of the Hague Group as they are. South Africa has led the legal charge at the ICJ. Malaysia and Indonesia have pressed for full diplomatic isolation. Slovenia, though a small state, has joined this emergent moral bloc. And while its population is modest and its military footprint limited, its action carries symbolic and legal weight that can be leveraged by others. This action is likely not the end of it. Slovenian officials have indicated that further national measures may follow yet. These could include sanctions on Israeli officials, suspension of bilateral cooperation agreements, or support for legal accountability in international courts. What began with recognition and has moved through to embargo may yet evolve into a broader campaign of lawful resistance by a state, not just from campaign groups, not just from the likes of Palestine Action, for instance. A entire state could now begin to go down this road. The question is not whether such steps are radical, though, it's whether they are commensurate with the scale of the crimes now under investigation. I might have to say, about time. And as Slovenian policymakers navigate the diplomatic repercussions of their stance, they do so with a growing awareness that they are not alone. From The Hague to Bogota to Dublin to Kuala Lumpur, the architecture of Israeli impunity is being challenged from multiple directions now. Slovenia's embargo on Israel fundamentally marks a turning point. It's not merely a symbolic gesture by a minor state, it's a legally grounded, diplomatically courageous, and strategically meaningful intervention. It challenges the European Union's complicity, it disrupts the infrastructure of arms transfers, it aligns with the rulings of international courts, and it reminds the world that even small states can exercise moral leadership when larger powers choose paralysis instead. As debates about state responsibility, arms export controls, and international justice intensify, Slovenia's decision will be remembered not only as a first, but potentially as a foundation. The test now is whether others will follow, or whether they allow Slovenia to stand alone. A solitary example of lawful resistance in a continent that has too often preferred accommodation to accountability. Whatever happens next, the precedent has now been set. A line has been crossed, and in doing so, Slovenia has just made one thing clear. Europe's silence is not unanimous. It's also a testament to what information is getting out of Gaza by brave journalists on the ground too, along with the people suffering themselves on social media, that these political moves are even getting made at all, of course. It's precisely why Israel is so determined to keep outside journalists out as well. So we should not be surprised at all at their threat to end aid drops over Gaza if planes keep taking journalists up with them to look down on Gaza and see for themselves what Israel have done. Such moral righteousness shouldn't have anything to hide, should it? I'll get all the details of their desperation to keep hiding their actions in this suggested video here as your recommended next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, sort of spreading the word and help support the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, as we do every day. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.